last year in August, we made a decision for me to go back to school. I am going up to University of Michigan Law School, and we came to that decision after a lot of thoughts and prayers, and obviously it's had a big impact in our lives in the last year, and in particular on our budget. We've had to start to budget for 2 households. But in those budget cuts, one of the things that we were looking at, of course, was our donations to Mount Olivet. And we looked at that and we had to decide whether that was something we were going to keep, something we were going to cut, or whether it was something that we should be looking at growing. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what at Mount Olivet was important to us and how much we should be giving to that.
I grew up in the United Methodist Church. I grew up in the same church, was baptized, confirmed, and married in the same church. And so when I moved out to DC, we have some family friends, or I have some family friends out here in the DC area who I knew the church I grew up in, and so kind of knew would be similar. And I had emailed him and asked him, I'm out in Arlington now, where should we go to church? And Mount Olivet was one of the ones they suggested. And
I think one of the first things we did when we sat down in the pew is there's the welcome brochure, the one that trifolds into a W, and there was an activities pamphlet, and we started looking through those, and we saw a lot of the outreach and a lot of the activities like community assistance, where Mount Olivet is actually a church that goes outside of the doors, reaches out into the community, and helps people in the community. And I think that's one of the things that we were looking for in a church. And I think that community assistance and Change the World Sunday and things like that are emblematic of the kinds of things that kept us here.
And I remember, I think one of the Sundays we were here, I don't even think it was a children's choir Sunday, one of our first Sundays, and the number of children and young families that are here. So it was more of a community that we felt like we fit in. We didn't feel like we were the odd people out staying in the pews that were like 20, 30 years younger than everybody else in the congregation. So it felt more comfortable to even just walk in the door.
And further, it's a place where we could actually see ourselves staying for 10, 20 years, and having the opportunity to raise our children in the church and in the church community.
And I know for me, the church I grew up in, it was very much like a second family and a second home. And so it took a while before I was willing to transfer my membership to Mount Olivet. But once I did, this place has become like a second family and a second home. I don't think I could get through him being in Michigan. Sorry. Without Tim and Tara and Ann and Kevin and a bunch of the people here.
It's been great being able to come home and know that she's been well taken care of. There's a small group that started up this past year when I was away at school, and that's been a huge source of support for Shannon. She has in the past year become one of the co-lay leaders at Mount Olivet, and being involved and having a lot of meetings and such to keep her busy when I'm not home in the evening, when she's coming home to an empty condo, has been a big help.
Coming to Mount Olivet and listening to Tim preach, and actually getting to talk to him sometimes outside of church about what his vision for what Mount Olivet could be, and where just how we could work in Arlington and in the community is just amazing.
It's been a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. And so, you know, to help be a part of that and hear that every week is really great. I remember one of the conversations we had out of the Enough campaign was going back to our budget when we were trying to figure out at that time, you know, how much we could contribute and pledge, was, you know, how are we spending our money and what does that say about us? And at the time we were spending, and I think I joked about it at the time, more on Starbucks than we were at church. And I wasn't actually really okay with that because church is more important. So, and so starting to reevaluate our budget priorities at that time, when things were a little bit easier because we were both employed, so that when we got to having to figure out how to support 2 households on 1 income and loans, how we would go about that and what that meant for what's really important and what can we do without, such as cable. But church is one of the things that needed to stay.